Thank you very much, Dr. Noguchi, for agreeing to be interviewed today. My name is Naomi Fujishima, and I'm the VIP Liaison for JALT 2023. So I'd just like to, first of all, introduce you, and then I'll ask you some questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you. So this is Dr. Judy Noguchi. She's Professor Emerita at Kobe Gakuin University. She does research, materials development, and teaching in English for specific purposes. She's published a lot, and she's done a lot of work in the past few years. So I hope that you can tell us a little bit about yourself. So let me start with the first question. Okay, so can you provide a brief overview of your area of expertise and your current work or research interests?
Yeah, I started off in science, in chemistry to be specific, and I sort of got into English teaching through the back door because people wanted me to teach English for chemists, and that was something I felt I really couldn't say no to. I didn't want to just teach English. That didn't interest me because I hated my English classes when I was studying at university. All you get is, you write essays and the teacher gives you all kinds of comments on it, and that's it. And I didn't feel it was worth writing almost, and so I wasn't interested in teaching English per se. But because I was majoring in science, I realized how important communication in science was. And so when one university asked me to teach English for chemists, I said, okay, I'll give it a try. But this was way back in the dark ages when there were no materials. There wasn't even the idea of English for ESP, English for specific purposes. They had names like English for science and technology, English for medical purposes, all of these different varieties. And it was only after I started teaching in it that the field sort of evolved. Yeah.
So you're a pioneer in this.
Well, I don't know. I was sort of trying to do something that would be useful to the students.
So this was while you were in Hawaii that you were
No. This was after I got to Japan. I
see.
came to Japan, and I couldn't speak Japanese, and so people said, "Oh, why don't you teach English?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to teach English." And that went on for a while. But when my kids were ready to go to school, I had been here for a while. I got this job offer, and I couldn't find any textbooks that I was interested in using until Oxford University Press came out with something called Basic English for Science. And so I jumped on it, but it just didn't work with the students. The vocabulary and the grammar exercises were just too simple because they probably knew more grammar than I did. But the listening exercises were just too difficult. They couldn't handle them. And so I wrote to my mom and I said, can you send me my old chem textbooks? And so she sent me about 2 boxes of them.
Oh, dear.
And I picked out stuff from there. People really literally said, these kids can't say hello, how are you, or hold a conversation. How are they going to understand this kind of stuff? But when I showed the kids the organic double bond theory, how to do chromatography, thin layer chromatography, the principles behind it, they understood the principles. They said, "Oh yeah, we already know. We had this in organic class. We did this in lab last week. The synthesis of aspirin. Oh, this is how you say it in English." And I said, "Okay, this is what I want to do." And so I started developing materials that I could teach with, like that. And I wanted to get that into a textbook, but I was picking and choosing from all different sources, and the publishers would say, well, if you want to translate one book, we'll get the copyright for that. But if you want it from here and there, it's not going to work that way because it's difficult to get the copyright permission for that. And so
Right.
for a while, I was just simply doing things like that. And then I realized that I really did need to go back and study about teaching language on a formal basis. And that's when Temple University started their classes, masters in education class.
Yes.
And yeah, and so I enrolled in it, and this is like years had passed since I finished my bachelor's, and so I was kind of leery of, can I take this? Can I do this? But it turned out to be so interesting, so fascinating. And they had a distinguished lecturers program
Yes.
where they had people from all over the world. I mean, the top people in the
Right.
world come to talk to us. And so you got an overview of the entire field. It was absolutely fascinating, very exciting. And so when I finished the program, I said, oh gosh, I really am interested in doing a little bit more work. But their PhD, well, they called it an EDD at the time. Now it's a PhD program, hadn't started. And that was just about the time when the University of Birmingham in the UK
Yes.
was doing very interesting work with corpus linguistics. They came out with the first dictionary that was entirely based on corpus. It just blew my mind. I went to a JALT conference,
Yes.
and just before I left for the conference, I got a message from somebody at JALT saying, please go to this presentation and report on it. And it happened to be the Collins-Cobild dictionary.
Oh, okay.
And from the first, Jane, what's her name? Can't remember her name now. Jane, something or other, came and talked to us. And she said, the first thing she said just blew my mind. She said, how would you describe wood in a dictionary? And she said, the most common form of wood is apostrophe D, because it would be used in, for example, during the summer, we would go to the beach to do this. Weed, 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 all the way down. After that, it wouldn't be we would.
Right.
It wouldn't be past tense of will. And
Ah,
I thought, oh my God, this is something I need to look into. This is
yeah.
it. And so they were doing the Cobild dictionary corpus work, and the person who was by that time they had developed a journal, English for Specific Purposes journal, and the editor, Tony Dudley Evans, was at University of Birmingham. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a combination, I'm very interested in. But University of Birmingham is far away.
Yes.
I was still raising a family. I couldn't, leave everything and go and study for 3 years in UK.
Yeah.
But I found out that they had something called a sandwich program. It's called a sandwich program because you go to the UK and you study there for something like 10 weeks. It's mandatory that you be there physically for 10 weeks. And then in between, you can come back and do your reading and your writing on your own. And so I decided to sign up for that. And I went for an interview at the University of Birmingham, and Malcolm Coulthard took us out to lunch. And it was really a fascinating experience. And Tony agreed to take me on he was going to be the supervisor, and that's how I got started. And it
Wow.
was absolutely fascinating because University of Birmingham, because of its location, it had a lot of people from Europe, all over Europe, Middle East, Africa, people that you don't usually get to meet if you're studying in an Asian situation. And so you get different views of the world, different ways of looking at things. Yeah, it was absolutely fascinating. Really enjoyed it.
And now you're developing a vocabulary app?
Oh, um, Yeah, that's a long story. When I started teaching in the Department of Pharmacy, School of Pharmaceutical Sciences, I realized that the students really needed these technical terminology based on Latin and Greek affixes. And so I started, and it was a huge class. It was like I had something like 60 to 70 students, and I had
Oh,
four
wow.
classes, and another class which was a little bit smaller, but very similar. And so I had something like 240 to 300 students, and I needed to teach them vocabulary. I mean, this technical terminology is extremely important for
Yes.
science. And so um, I started off with something similar, like telephone. Everybody knows telephone, and tele means far away, and phone means sound, and that kind of stuff. So, introducing them to the Greek and Latin affixes, but in sentences that they could actually use,
Mm-hmm.
sentences that they could understand. And so, in the first year, I would make all the quizzes. We'd have at the beginning of each class, we'd have a 10-minute quiz with 10 vocabulary items,
Mm-hmm.
and they had to decide which sentence it would fit in. And the sentence had something like, I went to the gastroenterology section because I had stomach pain.
Mm-hmm.
So gastro and stomach
Uh-huh.
fit. So they'd had to pick gastroenterology, or I had gastritis. They'd had to pick gastritis from the list
Uh-huh.
because stomach was in the sentence,
Right.
something like that.
Uh-huh.
And I would do this for the first year. And the second year, I had the students make the sentences.
Oh.
And it was really interesting. Getting the students involved was very important. I felt
Mm-hmm.
they needed to take a hold of their own learning experience. And getting them interested was one thing. So I said, okay, now it's your turn. Next week, we're going to have this list of um, affixes.
Mm-hmm.
Can you find interesting sentences? And if you make, and because there's 60 to 70 students, I had them divided into groups. So I had everything, sometimes 10 to 15 groups. And it was, and I gave them group points for everything. So if they turned in interesting sentences, they'd get points for that. If they
Mm-hmm.
turned in sentences, they'd get points for that. I gave them points for everything. And
That's motivating.
yeah, it's very motivating. It's amazingly motivating.
Yeah.
Um, when I had students write answers on the blackboard, we had this huge blackboard in the class. They would run. And so I had to say, no running. Everybody have to walk up. And I knew it was working when the person in the front row, the girl next to one of them said, I want to write this on the board, but I'm not sure if I'm correct. And her group member said, go and try anyway. She's going
Yeah.
to give us a point for it.
Yeah. Very
And
supportive. Yeah.
if they write something on the board, they get a point for it, which means they are totally interested whether or not that's correct or not.
Right.
They are all ears. And so the teacher in the next class actually said, no, what she's going to say, what are you doing in your class? I said, why? The students come into my class totally exhausted. And so I knew it was working. And I'd be walking in the hallway and somebody would come up to me, group four, or give us points. But
Right.
it's very fascinating.
So is
And
this app available for anyone to use, or is it just something you developed for?
Yeah, right now we're still in the process of doing it. We got Kaken funding for
Uh-huh.
it, but
Uh-huh.
of course that's not enough. And
Mm-hmm.
so Maruzen Yushodo is supporting us,
I
and
see.
they actually want to sell sounds, but get subscription for
I see.
something like this when it's actually offered. We're still in the process of developing it, so it'll may take another year or so. Yeah.
Okay.
But
Wow.
the app includes, and when we were trying to make the app, we realized that we had to do it at 3 levels. One was a simple general English level.
Mm.
So you had lots of words like hospital and stuff like that that they needed to know anyway. And then you had words that are in between, like administer. For example, the word administer has many different meanings. It's a polysemous word with many meanings. And so that kind of intermediate vocabulary. And then the real technical stuff, which like gastritis or gastroenterology
Mm.
or things like that. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting.
And the app has both English and Japanese, and
Okay.
it has the sentences in both English and Japanese. And you
Wow.
can listen to the word being pronounced, you can listen to the sentence being read. Yeah. And we have
Well,
the sentences are read by various people, so you get a whole range of dialects
well,
and
that's good, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
you really do. Mm.
Okay, let me move on to the next question.
Okay. Yeah, I
So
talk too much. Just cut me
that's
off.
okay. So what key message do you plan to convey during your presentation at JALT in November?
AI has made amazing exponential development, and it's continuing to develop. It's not only with ChatGPT and stuff like that, but recently the National Academies of Science in the United States has actually put out something called an automated research workflow program, where you use all of these AI tools to help you do your research. And so, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this as language
Mhm.
teachers? And I think it's rather than I think we need to introduce these tools, but we need to introduce how to use them, make students
Exactly.
aware that they are humans, and so they are here to solve problems. They need to develop critical thinking skills because we were just flooded with information now.
Mm.
And they need to have good communication skills to express what they really want to say. I'm involved in uh, what, senior college. It's a school for, I don't know, call it a school, but it's called Silver College in Kobe.
Okay.
And these are people who are retirees, but they're
Mhm.
interested and they come back to study and learn.
Mhm.
And they're doing projects in their third year, group projects. And one of them said, very interestingly, all of this information that we're gathering is from Wikipedia. It's like it's on the internet, it's all out there.
Yeah.
What use is it? And that's a very true point. And I told them, well, okay, first of all, there's a flood of information. You need to be able to judge what is really true or not. So my recipe for my students is see if you can find three entirely different sources that say the same thing.
Uh-huh.
And maybe a television program, maybe a newspaper, maybe even the technical bulletin or something.
Oh,
If they say the same thing, then it's probably pretty good information. That's
okay.
one thing. Cite all your references, and based on that, try to develop something new. So you have all this information. Just having the information isn't going to do anything.
Yeah.
Anybody can go to an internet site and find all this kind of stuff. So it's a so what thing.
Mm.
So what are you going to do with this? And you got all this information. Can you make a suggestion as to what can be done after collating all of this
Mhm.
stuff?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's important.
Yes, definitely. And something that a lot of Japanese students maybe need more training on. The
I
critical.
definitely think so. With my undergrads, I would tell them, same thing. Find at least three different sources. Don't get it all from one blog. Don't get it
Exactly.
from one site because they keep saying the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah, find different, and then be critical about it. Think about it, and then try to do something new,
Yes, yes.
something original. Yeah. Mm.
Okay. So finally, how do you envision your presentation benefiting the conference attendees and the broader academic community?
Oh, I don't know. It depends on what they take from what I say, really. Yeah.
Well, I
But
think,
I
yeah,
do hope.
especially. Chat
Yeah.
GPT, and you
Right.
mentioned here BERT, which
Yeah,
I'm
and
not so
Bob,
familiar with,
and
but
all of these other, they're all being developed simultaneously, and they are becoming exponentially better day by day, literally. But
mm,
I think what we need to focus on is the fact that I think too much of language teaching up to now, that's why I hated English when I was, you know, you have to take an English course if you are in an American situation,
right.
and that's to teach you how to read and write, which I think is, I understand that. But if you're only being taught the correct grammar, that is something that can be done by ChatGPT
Mm,
or Grammarly or something. I think we need to look at a bigger picture of what is it that you want to say? What is it that you want to? The ESP idea is having a community that you want to address.
mhm,
What kind of message are you trying to get these people to get from what you are saying? I
mhm,
think that's the essence of ESP. And it doesn't have to be a technical professional community. For example, when I taught translation, I also told the people, when you translate something from Japanese to English, you need to think about why you're doing this
mhm,
translation.
mhm,
Who are you aiming at? So if, for example, simple thing, let's say you have a recipe, a Japanese recipe.
mhm,
If you're translating this for local, for people in the local area, you can write, go and buy a block of tofu, okay, and kinukoshi tofu, and that
uh-huh,
makes total sense. But if you're going to put this on the internet, and somebody in the Middle East is going to read it, they may not have tofu, okay.
yes,
So what are they going to? You need to do the explanation. You need to say. So it depends on why you're doing the translation.
yes,
It depends on who you're trying to communicate to. Yeah.
yeah, that's
So
important.
I use this thing with my students, the PAIL, PAIL. What is the purpose of this text? Who are you trying to communicate this to? What kind of information do you want to get across? And that will tell you what kind of language you need to use.
Mhm, mhm,
And so one of the things that I had in my textbook for pharmaceutical science students was two messages from the FDA that came out on the same day. One was for healthcare professionals, and the other was for the patient or the caregiver.
mhm,
It was all the same drug, and the purpose was the same, to ensure that the drug was taken properly. But because the purpose was the same, but because the audience was different, the kind of information presented was different, and the
mhm.
language was different.
Ah,
So it's the same purpose, but different audience,
that's
different level of information. If you tell the patient or the caregiver all of this specialized information, you would overwhelm them, and they would end up
yeah.
not knowing what to do.
Mm,
But the healthcare professional would need to know some of this kind of information. Yeah.
mhm.
So language is really important for this kind of, when you need to get a message across clearly, it's extremely important.
Yes.
And having this kind of ESP idea of the fact that there is a community out there you're trying to reach. What are you trying to do with this? Um, when John Swells was developing this idea, he used something from what the Four C's, the idea that a genre text has an action component. It does something.
Mm,
It does something. It has a substance component, which is the information it's carrying. And it has the form component, which is how you're going to get this message across, how you're going
mhm.
to actually put it into words. And I think that's extremely important.
Yes, yes. Have you
Mhm.
noticed any changes since you first came to Japan and started teaching ESP?
Oh, yeah, it's changed a lot. People are now realizing that you don't study English, you study English for different reasons.
Mm,
And that's why Kyoto University revamped their entire thing. They are looking at English for general academic purposes, and then English for specific academic purposes.
Okay.
Because Kyoto University is a research university, they figured, okay, we're going to teach them academic English. This is the kind of stuff they're going to need for their research, for their work in the future, for their careers. Yeah, things have changed greatly. So for the World English's journal, I think it was 2 years ago, I wrote an article saying that Japan is changing. People would often laugh at how terrible the Japanese were with English.
Yeah.
But it's changing rapidly.
Oh, for the better, we hope.
Oh, of course, of course. I mean, well, because English is so ubiquitous now, if you don't have it, you literally can't survive professionally, I think, on a professional level. Yeah. So you do need it. Yeah. But this is not to say that it's only going to be English for English people. It's English that can express other ideas from other cultures, from other languages. I think that's the key. That's what's important. We need to be able to communicate at a deeper level. It's not just hello, how are you, or I like what you're doing and stuff like that. No, it has to be at from a very deep level, from almost a level that goes into the culture that you are trying to represent, the language that you are trying to express. You have to be able to express that in English so that it's understandable and the message gets across.
That's right. Yeah. Excellent. Wonderful last words. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I really tend to talk too much.
No, it was wonderful. Thank you. And we really looking forward to your participation and your talks at
I hope it works. Yeah, but those are the things that I've been thinking about. Yeah.
Okay, I'll stop the recording now.
Okay.